Hello, I'm Case Medlin with Bear Range and Pasture. For the next few minutes, I'd like to visit with you about a new product that was launched just this year, Invora herbicide. But before I do, let me introduce you to the greater Bear Range and Pasture team. Brian Kane leads the sales folks of Gerald Hobson, Rob Brooks, and Tom Den. Tom works Western New Mexico and Arizona. Gerald and Rob break up Eastern New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma. Also have a couple of technical consultants with us. You may recognize these folks, Dr. Wayne Hanselka out of Corpus Christi and Dr. Alan McGinney out of San Angelo. These are both retired professor emeritus with Texas A&M AgriLife. And myself, I'm a regional stewardship manager. I'd like to challenge some of your thinking around brush control practices that maybe have been ingrained in you for a long time. We've got a neat set of data that we'd like to show you. It took many years to put this set of data together, actually, but I'd like to really dig deep into that and actually maybe get you to thinking about your brush management techniques and what you expect from those practices a different way. I'd like to kick that thought off by actually asking you to consider 3 questions. Have we been conditioned to brush management expectations? Basically, what the results should be from a brush treatment. Specifically, how do you know if a brush treatment is effective? Kind of an easy question to answer, I think, but maybe not quite as easy as the next question. When do you know if that brush treatment is effective? Ponder those as we cover a little bit about Invora herbicide, kind of what it is, what it does. Invora is, as I said, a new product, but it also brings with it a new active ingredient, which is actually very important. Active ingredients in the range and pasture business are kind of few and far in between, particularly when you roll to the brush side of things. But Invora is both a new product and a new active ingredient that it houses with it. It is offered for use on privately owned, non-hayed, so this is not for hay production sites, rangeland and perennial grasslands managed for rangeland. In other words, those are your grazing lands. Those are not hay fields. It was actually labeled at the federal label. We received the federal label in early February. State registrations in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona shortly thereafter. It is actually a premix of 2 different active ingredients, aminocyclopyrrochlor and triclopyr. Both of those active ingredients are formulated as an amine formulation in this product, so it is practically non-volatile. It is a restricted use pesticide. Other products in the range of pasture market carry this restricted use pesticide categorization. The reason for its restricted use is that it may injure or be phytotoxic to susceptible non-target plants. It is for retail sale to and use only by certified applicators, both commercial and private, and persons under their direct supervision. This year we launched Invora. It is available in 2 different container sizes, 30-gallon drums and 250-gallon totes. In the future, we'll be releasing smaller container sizes. But one thing that we had to guard against is a new requirement that is on our label. It is a training requirement. So prior to applying this product, all applicators must complete picolinic acid chemistry training. This gives you an in-depth look at the picolinic acid herbicides, which Invora is a member of. There's several other products that are on the market today that are members of this picolinic acid family. You can obtain this training by going to a Texas A&M website, but the easiest way to get there actually is to go to www.invora.com, scroll down to the training section and click the link there. It'll take you straight to the Texas A&M AgriLife website. This training is required every 2 years. You need to keep that certification, that certificate that is printed from that website. You need to keep that for at least 3 years. There's a lot of good information on this website. There's a lot of good information in this training. I would encourage you to take the training, whether or not you intend to apply the product or not. If you're simply a landowner or rancher and you have your product sprayed, it's still a good thing to take this training and learn what's being applied to your land. Invora can actually be used as a broadcast spray, both aerial and ground broadcast, or it can be used as an individual plant treatment. The aerial broadcast rates are from 12 to 48 fluid ounces in a single application. 12-ounce rate targeting more broadleaf weeds. As you step up to 24, 36, and 48, brings more activity on the woody species that are present out there on the rangeland. The individual plant treatments consisting of foliar leaf sprays as well as basal stem sprays and cut stump sprays. They are also on the label. One thing that is very different about our basal stem spray and cut stump sprays is that we require a water carrier with an MSOOS adjuvant. If you don't know what that is, call the people that supply you with your chemicals. I'm sure they can help you, or call one of us. That would be fine. As far as the maximum use rate, we do have a 54 fluid ounces per acre max use per year. But keep in mind, only 48 fluid ounces in a single application can be applied. Two applications can be made per year, provided there's at least 14 days in between. This is to allow people to clean up maybe skips or misses or things like that out there in the field if those arise. In terms of broadcast application timing on some of the key brush species that we fight, one thing that we need to make sure is that we get good leaf cover on the plants. So we need to avoid any applications with the leaf canopy is damaged over 25% due to hail, insects, disease, drought, and that kind of thing. We also need to avoid applications when we have that new light green growth on a lot of our brush species like mesquite, like weesach, soon after a rainfall event. We need to give it time for those new green leaves, light green leaves, to actually mature, turn dark green. Then we can proceed about our applications. We're basically sitting in here in August of 2020 have come to the close of the honey mesquite spray season. However, the weesach spray season is just beginning and will continue for a couple of months, maybe up to approximately November 1st. Certainly we have to judge that by the conditions of the brush as we get later into the fall. Honey mesquite, or western honey mesquite rather, we're certainly in that window right now. It's a much narrower window, but we do like a fall application on western honey mesquite out in that New Mexico or far west Texas area. We certainly need adequate soil moisture. That area typically receives some of the monsoon rains this time of year. We need to let the mesquite go ahead and put on its new green growth, light green growth, let that mature, harden off, and then begin those applications. But we're in that window right now. Invora is not just a brush control product. It does basically have over 30 different broadleaf species of weeds that are actually on the label. A lot of those are common across much of Texas, southern Oklahoma, New Mexico, and the like. So brings a lot of broadleaf weed control activity with it as well. There are about 5 different species that are labeled for broadcast applications on the Invora label when it comes to woody plant control. The top 3 there that I listed, honey mesquite, western honey, and weesach, certainly can be used for broadcast applications, but there are a few others on the label as well. When we go to the IPT foliar leaf spray applications, there's a lot more species there that Invora actually has activity on from an IPT foliar leaf spray. So if you're fighting brush, say in some fence lines and things like that, it's going to be a mixed batch of brush species out there. Invora has good activity on a wider spectrum of weeds than just mesquite and weesach. Show you a snapshot of a little bit of data. This is apparent mortality 2 years after treatment resulting from IPT foliar leaf sprays with Invora. The blue bars, of course, is the average across the different number of sites that you see listed at the bottom for each species. So we have good activity on whitebrush, lopebush, agarito, and a bunch of other woody plants out there that may be on your rangeland or in your fence lines that you're wanting to control. The rest of this presentation, I'd like to focus more on the broadcast applications. What you're seeing now is weesach apparent mortality 2 years after treatment. A data slide you've probably seen many similar data slides to this with other products or with Invora. for a number of years now. These were aerial or ground broadcast applications. It's a 4-trial summary. If you look on the right side, that's actually the average composed by the 4 locations that you see there. Invora in the blue bar fared fairly well, 85% at 2 years after application, and the industry standards there came in just less than 70%. However, I think there's another way of looking at some of our data that we have around Invora herbicide. This is a similar to the last slide that I just showed, except this is honey mesquite, apparent mortality 2 years after treatment. These trials were established in 2012. There's 4 trials there. Invora shook out just less than 90% apparent mortality. Sendero, the industry standard at the time, 72%. However, one question that has come to my mind, and I ask you this on the second slide, when should these assessments be made? Because truly what we're talking about here, apparent mortality means basically there's no green leaves on the plant at the time the data was collected, so 2 years after. There's a lot of products on the market today that you can actually knock the leaves off of woody brush for 2 years. Doesn't mean you necessarily control the brush, doesn't mean you kill the brush. You're just controlling the leaf development on the brush for a couple of years. So we would like to actually reset the conversation and actually take a little bit longer term look at some of these brush control products that are on the market today, and specifically focus in on Invora. The photos that you see on the screen now were taken in 2008, 1 year after application of a 2007 established trial. Both plots look relatively good at 1 year after. I can tell you at 2 and 3 years after, they still look quite well. However, as we get out there and start looking at these now, that the pictures you see now are at 10 years after application, so it's taken in 2017, they compare a little differently. They take a little bit different look, if you will, from what we were seeing at, say, 1 and 2 years after application. So in 2017, we actually went back to the field, and this is one of the sites that we went to, and we became aware that we're seeing things that look a whole lot different when we get out there, say 5 to 10 years after application, than at 2 years after application. The photo on the left is a full mesquite plant there that you see and that photo was taken 5 years after application. It was taken in 2017. These trials were actually established this trial was actually established in 2012. The 2-year data was collected in 2014. And at that time, most of the mesquite plants in that standard treatment plot, this was the standard at the time, didn't have many leaves on them at all, if any. So it looked like at 2 years after application, excellent control from that standard treatment. Came back 3 years after that 2-year rating, so 5 years after the application was actually made, and a lot of those mesquite trees look just like this. And you can tell some of these plants were still trying to leaf out in the middle of summer. They're struggling, they're hurting. This is a close-up on the right side of the screen of the symptomology of the herbicide that's still in that plant. But they're not dead, which is what our 2-year rating basically stated, that those plants were actually dead at the time. So coming back around to these questions that I asked you earlier, how do you know if a brush treatment is effective? That one's pretty easy, whether or not the plant is dead. But the second question there may be a little bit more challenging. When do you know if that brush treatment is effective? That's one that I'd like to, I guess, get you to look at things a little bit differently with the follow-up data that I'm about to present. So have we been conditioned to brush management expectations? I guess we'll come back around to that one at the end of this presentation. So in 2017, we went back to the field. Dr. Wayne Hanselka and Dr. Alan McGinney and myself, we had 10 honey mesquite trials that we could go back into that had not been oversprayed, had not been manipulated in any other way since that initial application was made. These trials were from 4 to 10 years old. We also found 5 WESES trials that were from 4 to 6 years old. And we went back in strung a tape through there, and we actually measured the canopy cover in the standard treatment compared to the Invora treatment. This is a look at the data that we came away with. Notice on the y-axis here, this is honey mesquite canopy cover, not mortality, but canopy cover expressed in percent. The industry standard is shown in the red markings or line of best fit, and the Invora data is expressed in the green squares and also line of best fit. One thing I'd like to point out with this data slide real quick is most of the data, or all of the data that I've shown so far, has been in this time frame here, up to 2 years after application. However, with the data that we're showing now, we actually begin showing you data from 4 years after application and extend up to 10 years after application. Now, one thing that I think is kind of the rule of thumb, if you will, that a lot of people use in the state, particularly in Texas, is that treatment threshold for mesquite. Now, this is the point where mesquite becomes highly competitive and reduces the desirable forage production out there on the land. A lot of that goes back to work that Dr. Jim Ansley did. He was a university scientist there at the Vernon Research Station. And basically his data showed that at 25% canopy cover, there is a precipitous decline, quoting from one of his journal articles, in forage production based on the mesquite competition, the mesquite canopy. So if we take that treatment threshold, or that rule of thumb, if you will, and see when these two treatments, the industry standard or Invora, crosses that treatment threshold, that is the point that another follow-up application would be necessary in order to stay out of that highly competitive area with the mesquite. With the industry standard, that point is about 8.5 years. So in other words, the treatment life, based on our data set that we've collected, the treatment life for the industry standard is about 8.5 years. At that time, a follow-up treatment would be needed. Otherwise, the brush is going to be highly competitive with the desirable grass production. With the Invora treatment, if you'll see, even out to 10 years, on average, we're still less than 10% canopy cover, actually less than 5% canopy cover with an Invora treatment. So in terms of the treatment life, the time that is required between the initial application and reaching that point where a follow-up application would be required is much longer than the industry standard treatment based on this set of data of 10 different research sites. So we've shown you a 2-year after treatment results. I can show you several pictures from 2 years after application. This one up north of Abilene, big bull mesquite. Rancher basically kind of let it go. He was hoping to clean it up, take out some of the mesquite, return some of the grass to this treatment site. And certainly we can show you a lot of 2-year after treatment results. But why not take a look at 4 years after? After all, once again, ranching is a long-term commitment. You don't do it for 2 years and then move on to another patch of ground. Typically, you're in it for a little bit longer than 2 years. But if you're focused on 4 years, why not extend that out to 8 years? And that's what this photo shows. This is actually 8 years after application, an aerial treated site. This is up around Childress. You can see the brush on either side of the treatment line there that I drew in for you there. Now this site, it had been shredded, it had been manipulated in a lot of different ways prior to. Finally, the rancher basically just pulled away. We came along and actually put out a treatment on this location. And so this was some pretty mad brush when we actually went on this back in 2009 and 10. Actually had some 2011 trials on that location. Shifting gears, we can turn to Wasatch. We have a similar set of data. However, it's 5 locations across Wasatch. Similar type setup. Wasatch canopy cover on the y-axis, red showing the industry standard treatments, and then the green bars here, or green data, representing the Invora herbicide. Dr. Charlie Cyphers that worked in South Texas years ago, and his team basically established the treatment threshold with around Wasatch as being about 30%. So that's the point that Weisach becomes highly competitive and actually starts that forage reduction decline, if you will, out there on the rangeland. So that's kind of the rule of thumb of when to treat Weisach. If we look again when the different lines cross that treatment threshold, with the industry standard, it's just over 3 years. So basically after 3 years of treatment or following treatment, one would probably be thinking about maybe pulling the trigger on another follow-up application. This fits right in with some of the visits and talks that I've had with various ranchers in southern Texas that say every 3 to 4 years, you're probably going to be in there knocking back Weisach and beating it back. With our Invora treatment shown down at the bottom, you can see even out there to 6 years, our data point says about 10% canopy cover. Our line of best fit, taking into account all 5 of those treatment sites, basically says around 5% canopy cover of Weisach with it on average. Just to show you a couple of photos, this is actually from East Bernard, and you can see the untreated area back here at the back of this site. This was actually an aerial application. This is 4 years after treatment, a 36-ounce rate of Invora. This is just a ground view of the same site, untreated left and right, and you can actually see some of the carcasses of the woody brush that was killed, but those stems are still present out in that field. You can also see some of the plants that were missed with the spray. Invora is not 100%. There will be plants that will come on through. I've yet to find one that's been 100% at least, but it is still very highly effective on Weisach. This photo is actually from a ground broadcast application taken 5 years after treatment. Certainly, you can see exactly where that spray went and still lasting after 5 years of treatment. This is actually a 48-ounce rate of Invora. Still another photo taken over by Sinton at a ranch there, aerial broadcast. Photo taken 5 years after application, the 36-ounce rate of Invora. And you can pick up a few misses out there, but at the same time, the treatment's holding very well and still looks good 5 years after application. Another way to assess these treatments, or maybe to turn the data in a little different way, if we look at our 5 Weisach trial summary, at 3 years after application or just after 3 years after application, basically the industry standard on average had about 30% canopy cover back on those treatment sites. With the Invora treatment at the same time, rated at the same time, on average had about 2.5% Weisach canopy cover back on those treatment sites. Same thing for honey mesquite, 10 trial summary, but looking at those at 8.5 years after application, basically the honey mesquite canopy cover on average was 25% with those industry standard treatments, and that spanned actually 5 remedy reclaim locations and 5 Sendero locations is what that was, while the Invora herbicide treatment on average had about 2% canopy cover at 8.5 years. So just a little bit different way of looking at the same data. So have we been conditioned to how to, or what to expect from a brush treatment? I know for a fact that I was. I've kind of stepped out of that box and I'm looking at things a little bit different today than I was just a few years ago. How do you know if a brush treatment was effective? That's pretty simple. Whether or not it killed the brush. When do you know if that brush treatment was effective is probably a little bit different question. And I challenge you to make your own assessment of that. We know that you don't ranch a property most of the times, at least for 2 years. So why settle for 2-year data when you're trying to make your brush control decisions? Ask to see the product's long-term results. Matter of fact, we've only hit the market this year and we're already showing you our long-term results. So ask others for theirs. After all, one thing that you may be focused on is that initial grass release. We know that we see that with a lot of different products. This is a photo of an Invora treated site taken 1 year after application. Significant grass release. Wilman love grass really came back into that site 1 year after application. These photos were actually taken 2 years after an application of Invora at 24 fluid ounces on a mesquite site. excellent grass presence there 2 years after application versus the nearby untreated area. And you can see there's very little grass, there's very little anything but mesquite on that treatment site without the Invora treatment. We can go out west, out into central New Mexico, south central New Mexico, where we actually had a Western honey mesquite location out there several years ago. These photos were taken 3 years after application. Excellent grass release from a Invora at 36 fluid ounces, which would be the labeled site for, or the labeled rate for Western honey mesquite. So depending on your management system, what you're expecting from the land, whether it's take off that canopy cover of brush, whatever it may be, and release some of that forage, release some of your beneficial forbs back in there a few years later, such as Western ragweed that you see here for quail. You know, that may be what you're after. Or maybe you've got a site that's just tough, and it's you've struggled controlling the brush on it. Maybe you have big bull mesquite like you see in this upper right hand picture. Invora may be a fit there. Maybe it's down in south central Texas where you've got a lot of weasats that's crowding in your range land and actually choking out some of that forage that you need for your cattle. I think Invora definitely needs a second look, if nothing else. Give us a call and we can talk to you about it. The next part of this that I would like to focus on is maybe some of the things that we've been hearing, some of the rumblings we've been hearing around our product's label. I will tell you that our label is written differently than most products that you would probably find in this market. There's a lot of black and white in this label. There's very little gray. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see different about our label than other labels on the market. Now that label needs to be very black and white because we need to deliver those label directions and requirements to the user, to the landowner, of what to do and what not to do, so that you can correctly apply and manage that land. Even after that application has been made, be able to manage the residual properties of the herbicide. By doing so, you're able to better manage the risks that are associated with an Invora herbicide application. And let's face it, there are risks associated with any herbicide being applied. So we want to make it crystal clear on what those risks are and how you can manage those on your property. We all need to be better stewards of chemistry. We all need to be better stewards for both of our industries, both the chemical and the ranching industry. So our label is very tight, it's very concise, it's very clear, and I hope you'll give it a read. As far as is the label actually too restrictive, I'd like to focus on the first 2 bullet points first. There is a property line buffer with broadcast applications of 100 feet. There is also a buffer around various bodies of water with broadcast applications. If you'll take the training, you can hear more about both of these. That's Invora.com. Scroll down to the training section, click the button there, and you can actually take that training. One thing about these 2 bullet points here, and I visited with some applicators around these 2 bullet points, and I asked them if it's legal to spray the neighboring ranch with any herbicide. Well, no, you can't spray a neighbor's place. If you're hired to spray one ranch, you have to keep the product on that ranch. So then I asked them, can you drift onto that neighbor's range land or crop or whatever it is? Of course you can't. So I asked them how they went about doing that application without drifting or spraying on the neighboring ranch. Basically, they leave a strip, right? 1, maybe 2 passes, maybe more than that, depending on the neighboring crop that's bordering the ranch that they're actually treating. That is a buffer. Our label basically says leave a buffer of 100 feet. That buffer that they typically leave is either 1, 2, maybe 3 passes or more, depending on the prevailing wind direction and what the neighboring crop is. So with a 100-foot buffer lined out on our label, it's very explicit. Applicators are doing something similar to this today to keep it on the treatment ranch that they're flying for. With IPT applications, those applications can actually be made up to the property line, and in most cases, I believe up to the water's edge. So just to keep in mind. There is also very explicit, very explainable verbiage on the label as far as applications around or onto desirable trees, because there could be potential harm to those trees. That land manager needs to understand that and assess the potential to harm on the trees that they're treating. We know that we're highly effective, highly active on cottonwoods, on conifers. There's some other species out there that we are going to be effective on. If you need help sizing that up, please feel free to give us a call. We can walk you through that. But one thing is that decision is up to the landowner, and we want them to be aware that that is a decision that they need to spend some time on. We also require a 3-day clean out prior to transporting animals that have grazed off of the treatment site within 2 years after application. And this is to keep the residual nature of the herbicide that can be contained in the manure and in the urine. Make sure that we keep that on the treatment site. That way we're not impacting a neighbor, impacting a crop field that those cattle may be moved to, perhaps even impacting the compost industry. That is a very thriving industry that's growing in Texas and the Southwest. If you're not familiar with it, do a little reading, do a little checking, give one of us a call. We can help you navigate through this. Other products have similar type clean out requirements. Ours is very explicit when it says 3 days prior to the transport of livestock off of the treatment site. But there's ways that you can prepare for that. For example, leave an adjacent field untreated of similar stature. So basically it's rangeland, and you can move the cattle to that neighboring trap, clean them out there prior to transport. So there's ways of working through that. Give us a call and we can help you with that. There's a lot of good stewardship information on that picolinic acid chemistry training site that I told you about earlier. There's also a lot of good stewardship information on the label. This pictorial is actually on the label. I ask that you don't just fly through that. Actually spend some time understanding it. Basically, this will help you keep that residual herbicide on the treatment site within 2 years after application, so that you don't affect your neighbor or a business that you may be not have in mind at the time of application. The main thing is be informed. When you purchase that product, you become the owner of that chemistry. Do you know the requirements of the chemistry being applied? Not just Invora, but anything that you may be applying. Do you know the requirements? Do you know the vegetation movement requirements? What about the manure management requirements? Animal cleanout requirements? There's a whole host of things that you need to be informed of. If you have a question about Invora specifically, call one of us, call your Bayer rep, and still, I'll encourage you to take the training. Lasts about 45 minutes, costs you $15. It supports the university and their outreach effort. So consider that. You can get there by www.invora.com. Scroll down and click the link there. If you have your camera handy, I encourage you to take a photo of that. That's our contact information from sales, from a technical aspect, across the 4-state region. Feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have questions. That wraps up the presentation. Thank you for joining us, and don't hesitate to call.